All right. Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we have Ginger from Fi is Fun, who is back to do a Roundup episode with me. And we have a whole list of topics that we're going to try to get to. And yeah, this should be fun because Fi is fun. So with that, Ginger, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, this should be a good time. So I know your favorite topic is travel rewards. So I know you have a couple quick things that you wanted to talk about, ask about, etc.
Yes.
But I actually, and that's great. We're gonna have fun with that. I had a quick update about something that we had talked about on that episode with Clint, actually. So episode 438, we did the Dollars and Cents book club with Clint Murphy, and that was a ton of fun. And I had talked about this Taylor Swift concert that I was thinking about maybe taking my daughter to, and still a work in progress, but it's looking more likely that it's going to happen. And I actually kind of took the first, we talked in that book about psychological steps, right? And I took the first step towards that. And my story in and of itself is not that interesting, but I think what is interesting to pass along is the value of hotel rewards nights. And I think this is something so many of us in the FI community love our travel rewards. We love to accumulate them. And it's a little bit stressful sometimes to try to actually redeem them. And not everybody has dozens of hours to learn this and try to figure out every little intricacy of the minute details, right? Which is why I think just like everything that I try to focus on in life, I look for simplicity. So I'm always looking for what are the easiest airline and hotel programs to use. And I think the airline, it's a clear winner. It's Southwest. That is absolutely slam dunk the easiest because there's no award limitations. It just simply is, okay, could I pay cash or, obviously credit card, whatever, to book this flight? If so, then I can use my points. Simple, couldn't be easier. And I think hotel rewards are the same, but I think there's actually more potential value in hotel rewards. And this Taylor Swift concert is the perfect case in point. So I speculatively booked a night actually in a Hyatt Place in Pittsburgh that happens to be right next door to the Pittsburgh football stadium, which is where Taylor is performing in the middle of June. So this was one of those things where the hotels around town and certainly right around the stadium were either booked or about $800 a night, Ginger, which is crazy town, obviously. And what I did was I looked to see, okay, are there any award nights available for this Hyatt Place that's right there? It's a walking distance to the stadium. And it actually wound up that they were all booked. But what I did was I checked back every single day and one room opened up,
Yes.
which was absolutely awesome. And it was 15,000 points a night. Okay. Because it's just based on their award chart. It happens to be a category 4 Hyatt, which is actually the highest I think I've ever seen a Hyatt Place, frankly, maybe outside of New York City. But regardless, it's 15,000 points per night. And that means, and here's where the beautiful thing comes in that I wanted to get across is if you booked on the slowest Wednesday in February, it's 15,000 points a night. Or if Pittsburgh had the Super Bowl or they have Taylor Swift coming to town and hotel rooms are $1,000 a night, it's still the same 15,000 points a night.
Wow.
And that's the aha moment. And when you know the rules, when you know that's the case, and you realize, oh, wow, I can book this a year ahead of time. Well, I mean, not all of us obviously are going to the Super Bowl, but I'm sure there's some people listening who are like, man, I would like to go to the Super Bowl next year. Or for me, it's the geeky version. I would love to go to the Berkshire Hathaway event in Omaha, Nebraska next May. And there happens to be a Hyatt there. Maybe I just book ahead of time. And what's the worst that happens? The only opportunity cost is that I've tied up my points for a little bit. I haven't spent them because I could always cancel that and get 100% of my points returned. But so it's literally just the opportunity cost of having those points tied up, which, Ginger, to me seems like an absolute slam dunk. Again, in this case, we may not go to Taylor Swift, but if we do, I got an $800 a night hotel room for 15,000 points, which is remarkable.
Yeah. So how were you checking in every day? Were you calling them? Were you checking online?
Great question. So yeah, I actually just went to their hotel website every single day And it's so easy to use. I obviously sound like a Hyatt fanboy here. This is the same for Marriott or Hilton. They're really easy. You just go to their site, and when you're mocking up your booking, like, hey, I want to stay there June 16th to June 17th, there's just a little checkbox that says use points. So this would take me quite literally 15 seconds. Just go to this Hyatt Place's website, put in the date, click that checkbox. If nothing came up and it said, we're sorry, nothing's available, well, okay, there's nothing. But that one day, it was that voila, here's a room that's available and it shows 15,000 points. A couple clicks later, and the thing is booked. Obviously, assuming you have the points in your account, which I happen to have a Hyatt credit card that I love, but you could also transfer Chase Ultimate Rewards points there instantly to Hyatt, which is awesome, right? They can sit in your Chase account. And when you found the availability, you could just zip those points over. And quite literally, I mean, seconds later, you could have it done in under a minute. You just log back out of your Hyatt account and log back in, and the points are there. So it's a really cool thing.
And 15,000 Chase points would be 15,000 Hyatt points, or
Exactly.
yeah.
And that's one of the things why we're constantly talking up the Chase Ultimate Rewards cards. So think Sapphire Preferred, Sapphire Reserve, Ink Business Preferred, etc. It's because those points, they sit in your Chase account, and then you can transfer them to, I think it's over a dozen different transfer partners, including Hyatt, Southwest, which I also talked about, United Airlines, and then British Airways, which is a slightly more advanced thing where you can actually use them to fly American Airlines, which is pretty awesome. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to London to use them. So that's something that's a little bit outside us talking about this here in a quick little segment. But yeah, there's a lot of value from Ultimate Rewards points, which is why I frankly love them and start with them and tell everybody else to start with them.
Okay, perfect time to transition to update on Ginger's credit card journey.
Oh, nice.
So you mentioned a few episodes ago, you were talking about global entry. And this is one of those things where I've always thought, like, this is not available to me. This is for rich people. But then to hear you talking about it and hear you saying, okay, it's $20 a year, right? That was the thing that kind of blew my mind. Well, like, what am I doing with my life? So I looked into it a little bit. And especially with, you had also mentioned that a lot of these cards give you $100 towards global entry or the TSA pre-check. So I got the Capital One card, the cheaper one. I chose that one for a few reasons. One, it did that $100 thing. And then it also gave me 2 free passes, lounge passes. So I want to talk about that too. But let's go back to, as I was looking into it, I thought, okay, global entry, that's the thing for me. Then I started the process a little bit, and it says, okay, you have to go do this in-person interview, which it turned out is a problem because I am in a smaller city. I'm in Spokane. The closest one is in Seattle, 4 hours away. And then even if I was willing to make this journey to get this, which I'm not, but even if I was for a second, I thought, okay, maybe I could do it. You can't really plan in advance when your interview is going to be. You can't say, oh, I'm going to come in 2 weeks and here's where my interview is going to be. So I did notice that they're kind of the way to do this then for someone like me is on your way back from an international trip, right? When you're in a big airport, it looks like you can do it straight away in the airport. So I am going out of the country this summer. I was thinking,
Oh, nice.
okay, I could do it on the way back. But then the other plus of the pre-check for the TSA is you can have a kid come along with you and not pay for them.
Right.
So I'm kind of up in the air of which one of these I should do. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable to do the TSA pre-check. In fact, actually, I was just talking with my brother the other day, and him and his family are doing TSA pre-check. And I instantly was like, why aren't you doing global entry? This doesn't make any sense. He's
Uh-huh.
like, frankly, we just got the Southwest Companion Pass. We're going to be traveling domestically a lot for the next couple of years. And it just wasn't worth it for them to get global entry. I think just the important note is global entry also includes TSA PreCheck. So it's I don't know, backwards compatible, if you will. But so that's why for me, it was a slam dunk to do global entry. But yeah, I had to schedule an appointment that luckily it was just at the Richmond airport, which is only about a half hour for me. So it was no big deal. But for you to have to drive 4 hours, if you're not going to do it, obviously it doesn't make sense to devote an entire day to that. But, frankly, global entry is pretty awesome. It does save a lot of time if you're going to travel internationally. So I would advocate, because it's good for 5 years. And then when you have to renew it, at least in my case, I can only speak anecdotally. I didn't have to go in for another interview. It was just I paid my money, I filled out some information, made sure it was up to date. And then I got an email 2 days later that it was approved. So I'm at least getting 10 years out of one interview. So that clearly was worth it for me. But yeah, I think, like you said, if you can plan that around a trip where you're going to be at a major international airport, then yeah, it's a slam dunk.
I wonder if you would get to use it on that trip. I guess probably not because you wouldn't be approved yet.
Yeah, I would think
That's
not.
the other thing that's so painful. I'm like, okay, I could do it this summer and then I wouldn't even be able to use it on my international trip.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. But yeah, I guess at least, again, you'd have 5 more years. But yeah, they don't make it easy. But I guess rightfully so. They want to make sure that, I mean, the whole thing is about security anyway. So I get why it's done the way it's done, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating when you're on this side of it where it seems annoying.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway is if you're thinking about doing this, go and see where your interview would be. And if it's in the same town, that's really different, opportunity for you.
Agreed. And I know I was definitely able to make an appointment, I think a month or two out. So I don't know if that's changed in
Oh,
the
yeah.
subsequent years, but there are some ways to make it slightly easier. So, yeah, just real quick, I got an email from Melanie who wrote in, "Hi, Brad. I'm looking to take my family of 6 to an all inclusive resort in the next year or two. What car do you recommend would be the best fit to get some possible free nights at an all inclusive? Thanks for all you do, Melanie." So, okay. Melanie, I think to me, the best option would definitely be Hyatt, which we've already spent a lot of time talking about. So, Hyatt, you can transfer from Chase Ultimate Rewards, or the Hyatt credit card's fantastic. If you have multiple adults in the household, each of you can open up each of these cards. So you can accumulate a decent number of points. And Hyatt, if you just Google, and this is for everybody, obviously, you Google all inclusive Hyatt, they just bought a whole bunch of extra brands. So they have dozens of all inclusive. It used to just be a handful. There were, I think, 2 in Cancun and 2 in Jamaica for the longest time. And that was still the best all inclusive possibility. But to my knowledge, and I'm looking at it, it looks like there are a couple dozen hotel options now in the Caribbean and Mexico through Hyatt. So I think that clearly is the best. And these are not unreasonable either. I think for 2 people at least, and that's where the one little rub that I want to make sure we talk about, especially for Melanie, is for 2 people. I mean, Ginger, you can get these for a very reasonable, like 25,000 points a night, or maybe even less for the off peak. So you can absolutely get a ton of benefit with an all inclusive. And I know friends of ours went a handful of years ago. They went to the Hyatt in Cancun for their honeymoon actually and used points, which was awesome. And yeah, I mean, these are just regular all inclusives that you'd pay for a significant amount of money and you can just use your points, which is great. Now, the one caveat, and we're not going to get bogged down on this, but the one caveat is they usually charge additional points for every person over X number in the room. So I can guarantee for Melanie's family of 6, that's going to be certainly, it's going to make it dramatically more expensive with points. It might wind up that it's actually cheaper potentially to book 2 rooms. I can't promise that. Obviously, you have to do your own research, but it's something to look into because there is a supplementary charge for additional people. I think it might start at 3, frankly, but I know it's at that 4 range for sure because I remember that from at least the last time I checked for my family of 4. So something to consider. But really, for everybody out there, if you have Ultimate Rewards points or high points, you can get a lot of value from them, especially on all inclusives.
So, Brad, what's the best all inclusive vacation you've taken?
Oh, goodness. That's a good question. We went to a place in Mexico in the Cancun area. I forget, actually, I'd have to look up what it was called, but it was just really, really nice. We had in fairness, I've only went on a couple all inclusive vacations. So it's not like I don't have a high bar here to compare it to, but it was just a really nice room for the 4 of us. We had a separate bedroom and living area, and there was a pull-out couch. So for a family of 4, that was a game changer. I think that's one of the things I struggle with now in terms of, okay, when our family, a lot of us have different sleeping habits and such, and why Airbnbs are so attractive, even though they're very expensive for a very short term stay because of all the cleaning fees and ancillary fees and such. So we ideally would like to stay in a hotel, but it's pretty hard to find something that fits perfectly for our family. But anyway, what about you?
I've never done one.
Never.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm curious about what the main appeal is. And when I hear you say that there can be other sleeping situations, that makes it more doable or more attractive to me. But what else makes it so attractive to you?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest, it's not the perfect fit for our family in the sense that neither me nor Laura really drink
Mhm.
alcohol that much. So we maybe don't get our value, quote unquote, from it. But I think this actually probably goes back to what we were talking about in that book club episode with dollars and cents in terms of, hey, when you prepay for something, you don't feel the pain of purchasing. Like we were talking about precisely of if you had to pay for every bite you took, it would be a very miserable experience as opposed to, okay, there's just something luxurious feeling about going to an all inclusive, especially one that has a lot of nice restaurants. If it's just like one kind of half-hearted buffet, I mean that's not going to be so great. Obviously, you're going to come back pretty disappointed, but there are a lot of these all inclusives that have, I mean, a dozen different restaurants of all different types of cuisines and such. So it just feels really nice to roll in there and just say, listen, everything's already paid for. Let's just enjoy ourselves instead
Yeah.
of having that maybe ultra frugal mentality all the time. So I think it's just like a way to let go. And certainly if you can do it with points, so all the better.
Yeah.
And for everybody out there, we have a ton of travel resources at choosefy.com/travel. And as always, if you're going to sign up for a credit card and want to see our entire list of cards and also support us at the same time, choosefy.com/cards.
So, Brad, a couple months ago, you had mentioned something in the newsletter about the true cost of owning a car. And that's definitely something I'm interested in too. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that would be good. Okay, so this was actually an update to one of the very first episodes that Jonathan and I ever did. So I think he called it the true cost of car ownership, and it was interesting because each of us took a different lane on that episode. He was talking more about the maintenance costs on a yearly basis, and I set up this kind of wild scenario, which is all not really that wild when you go into it, but it's a thought experiment that you don't normally think of this length of time in terms of investing or really, frankly, your lifetime. But I actually have an update to this original thing. But let's just lay out real quick how I set this up. I didn't even take the ultra fi optimized version. I basically said, all right, in a adult driving lifetime, which again sounds kind of crazy, but it's probably about 45 years. It's probably longer than that, but roughly I said 45 years. So I had the person buying a new car and then having car payments, just regular old car payments for the first 5 years. And then they drove that car essentially into the ground for the next 10 years. Now, again, not the ultra optimized because I think it probably wouldn't be driven into the ground after 15 years, but let's just suspend disbelief and say, okay, during that first 5 years, they were paying $300 a month. And for the next 10 years, they were saving that $300 a month because, again, they're driving with no car payments at that point and investing it in low cost index funds. And now that's a 15-year cycle. And then essentially at year 16, they threw that car out. There's no residual value, I was arguing, and they just did it again. Another $300 a month for 5 years. And all the while, though, Ginger, importantly, that money that they had saved from the end of year 5 to the end of year 15 is compounding in the background, right? Because that's invested and it's keep on rocking and rolling. So I did that for a 3 car cycle. So it was basically, like I said, a 45-year adult driving lifetime. And they had 15 years where they made car payments, and they had 30 years where they didn't make car payments and they saved that $300. And at that time, so this was 6 years ago when I ran, because $300 for a car payment was pretty reasonable at that point. It was about $750,000 that person would have in net worth at the end of that, just for making that decision. Essentially, I ran like a horse race because the other option was, hey, I'm just going to have a car payment all the time. I'm either going to lease every month, again, for 45 years, basically just continually lease, or hey, if 5 years are up, I'm going to get a new car, roll into it, and I'm going to keep the same payments, right? Like that's what people do. And I was just trying to show that slightly more optimized. It doesn't seem like much. That's just one decision. But Ginger, $750,000. I mean, how many people have that kind of net worth, period, end of story, when they're in their 60s?
Yeah.
Virtually nobody. And that's one decision.
Yeah. I remember that episode. It was a long time ago, and I remember it. It was really powerful.
Nice. Yeah, I always love that. And so I updated it. So this was, I guess, a recent stat I saw. So I wrote this in February, but I think it was for December that the average car payment hit, I kid you not, $777 per month,
Crazy.
which is ludicrous. I mean, for something that's sitting idle 98% of the time, $777. But basically, just to kind of fast forward here, is I just ran that same scenario. I did the exact same thing, the 3 cycles of 15 years. But that person, again, I didn't do the optimized 5 version of this because I said, okay, even this 5 person is going to spend $777 per month on this car for 5 years, but then just not have to make those payments for the subsequent 10 years and just do that 3 times. Whereas the other person is either managing their payments, rolling into new cars, or leasing and just paying that 7 every month. Well,
Drum
this
roll.
isn't a right. Like this is not a $750,000 difference. It was almost $2 million.
Wow.
$1.9 million. So our FI driver, and really not the optimized FI driver, but just a normal FI driver, had a $1.9 million net worth as compared to zero, just based on this one decision.
I always think it's sort of interesting how people get to the $700 or $800 car payment. And I think it's related to a concept we talked about when we were doing the book club about mental accounting. And there's something about, oh, this is my transportation cost, it's my transportation bucket. And so we think of it really differently than we would think about, an extra $400 being in another category. It would be really alarming to suddenly spend $400 more on groceries or on clothes. I don't know. What do you think?
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, right, especially if when you're getting started out and you don't have a car, you almost by definition are getting that first and you're starting out making car payments and that
Hmm.
just becomes a habitual thing. Yeah, I wonder.
And you're thinking this is a necessity. And so therefore it goes into that category.
Yeah. I mean, I could certainly see that. Obviously, neither of us have done the psychological research on it, but I mean, it certainly makes sense to me. But yeah, to your point, I mean, goodness, if you're making that decision, and frankly, that's the average. I think it was also something, and I'm making this up from memory, but it was something on the order of 15% of car payments were over $1,000 a month.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
$1,000 a month. And when you go back to I love our kind of shorthand of for every $100 a month you cut out of your monthly budget, it's $30,000 less you need in your ultimate net worth. Your in your FI number. Your FI number decreases by $30,000 for every $100 you cut out of your monthly budget. So, I mean, Ginger, we're talking $1,000. That is a $300,000 decision,
Yeah.
and many of those people, again, are just kind of rolling into that. That does become that habitual every month $1,000 plus payment. I mean, that's like a mortgage. It's crazy.
Yeah. Not a mortgage anymore, but yeah, I hear you. I love that we're talking about this because it makes me think about a decision that my family made last summer where we got rid of one of our cars. So we're one car now and we got an electric bike and it's great. And so, it's definitely doable. But okay, so we're not paying for gas for a second car or insurance or upkeep. There's all these things we're saving on. But because it's been a while now, it's not something that's really that I notice, the absence of those things. And so it's good to be reminded, just like in the other way, like, oh, look at all this that I'm spending. It kind of becomes invisible. And there's a way in which our savings, I think, can also become invisible. And it's just sort of good to be reminded of it, to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, I like that. So tell me, because I have contemplated, my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I have contemplated
Yeah.
going, and she's right. I am crazy. In our stage of life right now, I think having one car would be very, very difficult. So I am fully admitting that I think I'm in the wrong here, at least for now. But how is it with one car?
Yeah. So there were definitely challenges, but I'll say one thing that made it work or makes it work for our family right now is that my child, who is 7, can fit on the back. And so if
Mm,
that wasn't available, if he was quite a bit older, then it would be absolutely impossible. And then my work is like 2 miles away from home. So it's pretty easy for me. In the winter, it was not as easy. I thought, oh, I'll just bike in the winter, and it was impossible. But, I took the bus or we figured out other ways to make it work.
that's cool. That is very cool.
Yeah, it's been really great.
Yeah, it's probably on some level an adventure, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, like, hey, I might take the bus. When have I ever taken the bus in my adult lifetime? For many of us, we probably haven't taken it all that often. Or you're 2 miles away. That's a really nice walk. That's a really nice bike ride. That's a really nice e-bike ride.
Yeah, it is a nice bike ride. And at first I was trying to make it too much like my old commute. Like I would take the same route and I got to get home as fast as possible. And then I really like, why am I doing this? So now I actually go out of my way a little bit. I go down by the river. It takes me 20 minutes to get home instead of, if I really rushed. And it's wonderful to just have a little space between here I'm at work, now I'm at home. I have this little bit of outside time in between it. So I think it's been really helpful for me to rethink, like, I'm not just trying to recreate, my commute exactly, but to think about what are the other possibilities here for me now. I couldn't drive the car down by the river. So why not do that now?
Hmm, I love that. Yeah, I mean, just getting outside is so
Yeah.
important. I know we had Greg from Outside 365 on episode 433 who talked about getting outside for one human powered mile, as he called it, every single day. And what's actually really cool, so I just mentioned my wife Laura, is before she even heard that episode, she just did this on her own. She came up with a fun challenge for herself to basically walk 1 mile a day outside on average. So she kind of gamified it in a sense where I've heard a lot of people do this, certainly over the years here on Choosify, with maybe paying off debt, where they have a number of boxes and they fill the boxes in or they check them off or something. It's like a very visual thing. So she created just a very long sheet of paper and cut it up into 365 different boxes. And she just literally fills them in with like a different colored marker or crayon when she completes it. And it's just really neat to see the progress she's made. I mean, we're almost halfway through the year at this point, and it's just fun. And it's another reason to keep that momentum going of, hey, I just really want to be outside every day. It just makes me feel good.
Yeah. This reminds me of a message you got about someone else who was trying to start up a fitness routine.
Yeah, Ginger, good call. John actually wrote in and he read Dr. Peter Attia's book, Outlive, which is
Oh
actually
yeah.
something.
I'm reading
Have
it
you read
right
that?
now. I'm reading it
Nice.
right now.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I have mentioned Dr. Attia so many times here on the podcast. I'm a huge fan of his. I've been following him for almost a decade, and he has become extraordinarily famous in the last year or so. He was the medical advisor on the Limitless show with Chris Hemsworth on Disney Plus, which if you haven't watched is just awesome. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And now he has this book, which I think the last time I checked, it was in the top 10 on Amazon. So just hugely popular. And yeah, he was asking a bunch of questions about zone two fitness, which is like a type of cardio workout, and how to get started. I think he's a little more advanced because he was also talking about maybe some supplements and things like that. But I think it was just for me like a good framework of, oh man, if I was trying to explain to somebody how to get started in fitness, what would I say? And now this Ginger is fraught with peril because everybody retreats into their own little camps when it comes to fitness. And I'm not trying to start a fight here or say that I'm doing anything that's perfect or not. But what I do is, I think what I do in life and what I hopefully have brought to this podcast for 600 episodes is I try to curate and synthesize information. And I'm not a world class expert on fitness or health, but I listen to world class experts and I try when I see people talking about the same thing in totally different arenas who may have never met each other. I'm like, oh, there's something here. So
I don't think you should hesitate at all to share what's worked for you because that's what we like to hear from each other. We just want to hear like what has a normal person done that has helped them to meet their goals.
yeah, well, no, I appreciate that. And yeah, I think right, I am just a normal suburban dad, but I think I've gotten to a level where I mean, I think my fitness is certainly in the top 5% of people my age and I think probably dramatically higher and it's just been fun. I think that's one of the coolest things is I've been doing this exercise program with Jonathan, which is actually just built around basically building muscle and strength. And it's I met a guy who is he's my personal trainer who I met him online and I spoke about him in the episode I did with Bo Loy recently, but I was a little sheepish when I mentioned it, Ginger, honestly, because I think in the back of my mind I still think I still have those old vestiges of like the frugal FI mindset and like, oh, I'm spending a couple $100 a month on a personal trainer, and like my mind goes, oh, that's so much. I can't believe you're doing this. And it's so ridiculous and stupid. And I understand that. But like, again, our minds play tricks on us sometimes. And I can say without any question, hiring this guy, Dean Turner, has been the single best decision I've ever made for my health. Like it is extraordinary how much I have improved in terms of strength in 4 months time. I mean, to the point where I mean, literally maxing out some of the machines at the gym, like the entire stack of weights, like I'm doing for like very controlled sets. And that's a really cool thing about this programming is it's built around not just throwing weight around to be a tough guy, but to actually control it, to have both on the concentric and the eccentric. So like essentially like the up and the down, if you will, and just have control and target certain muscles. And the other cool thing I think is it's built around a lot of rest in between sets so that basically like your central nervous system is recovering between sets. You're not just fatiguing the heck out of yourself and you feel great. You know, most people pat themselves on the back when they leave because they exhausted themselves and they get very minimal results, but they again feel kind of good because they exhausted themselves. And I think you need to figure out what you're trying to optimize for. And frankly, like again, there's not one answer. There's not, I'm not saying my answer is the right answer, but man, this has worked for me just unbelievably. And going back to John's question, I think when I've tried to curate and synthesize this information from experts like Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman, et cetera, they've talked about this zone 2 cardio training. So it's basically increasing your aerobic base. And it's actually quite interesting. I would highly recommend that anybody listening to this who's thinking about getting started with fitness really think about this, because essentially zone 2 training is this little sweet spot where your heart rate is up, but it's not up so much that you can't carry on a conversation. So as Atia says, you can carry on a conversation, you just don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're at that absolute threshold where you're not redlining, nothing's going crazy, you're not sitting there panting. Most of the time you can still nose breathe, which is really important. And you're not over that threshold where it's just essentially downhill until you get to the point of exhaustion. So theoretically, that could be your all day pace, essentially. So how it would work is you probably want to do about 3 times per week for about an hour each. And I believe me, I understand how hard this is. I'm not currently doing this, but what it more or less does is it increases that baseline level, because how you would do it if you were a runner, let's say, and you might be a competitive runner who's out there running 7 minutes per mile or less, but you're just constantly on that level of exhaustion. Well, you might have to take kind of an ego check and step back and say, okay, what could I maintain again at that pace where I can have a conversation but don't want to? And that might mean a 10-minute per mile pace, which again, to your ego might sound bad because you're a 6.5 minute miler, but this is playing the long game. And Ginger, what do people in the fight community do better than just about anybody else? They play the long game, right? And that's what's so cool. And okay, it might be 10 minutes to start, but then you get it down to 950 per mile, then 9.5, then 9. And all of a sudden, you're at, who knows, 7 minutes per mile, where you can just maintain that forever. And then your base is just so much wider, as Atia likes to say, and you're going to see dramatic improvements. So I think that's something, and they talk about world class athletes who I think a lot of us would think, oh, world class athletes are operating at like peak max functionality at all times. They're just going all out, and that's just not the case. When you hear lots of different experts talk, most of these world class athletes, especially in sports like cycling, swimming, and running, they're spending 60, 70, 80% of their time in this zone 2 to establish that base. And it's just one of these kind of paradigm shifting things for me that I just was totally unaware of. And then obviously you do want to get your heart rate up once or twice a week at minimum, just to kind of put the pedal to the metal and see what you got. But Yeah.
Make sure to be miserable for at least 20%.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to be miserable. But yeah, I mean, I think again, this is just my opinion from what I've curated from people, but I think realistically for most of us, strength is the absolute most important thing we can focus on that we aren't. And
Yeah.
it's not like to be a tough person, it's not to like have big muscles. It's just that realistically, they say every year from when you're 30 on, there's the thing called sarcopenia where basically our muscles start breaking down if we're not actively trying to strengthen them. And that is just an inexorable slide down to essentially nothingness, right? And if you know that's happening, you need to offset it and you need to proactively offset
Please check out Brad's book, The Slide to Nothingness.
it. The inexorable slide to
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah, yeah. So this is so interesting because when you were telling me about John's message and you said, "Oh, John's wondering what to do to get started," I interpreted the question differently. I assumed that he was talking about mindset. And so for
Oh,
those who are like, "Okay, I know what I need to do physically, but how do I get over the resistance to starting this kind of thing?" What would you say to that person?
yeah, that is a great question.
Or
So,
just, put another way, what worked for you?
yeah, I mean, I think, and I can say very specifically, especially with this new workout that I've had with Jonathan, is twofold. Well, it's accountability. So I have accountability with my trainer Dean because every single day he's looking at my logs. He's looking at how many steps I took that day. He's looking at my fitness results from the gym workout, and then just a couple other things with some nutrition in the background. But also just knowing that I have Jonathan getting there at 8 o'clock in the morning waiting for me. And if I decide to be lazy one day, well, I mess him up too. And I think just having that friend who's there with you is a big thing. That's not going to be the ideal scenario for everybody. That's not going to be realistic for a lot of people. But I think it really goes back to what James Clear talked to us about, right? The author of Atomic Habits, way back. It was 4.5 years ago, I think, in episode 157, where he just talks about these little things. Just do something little like put your gym shoes and your gym clothes out the night before
Mhm.
and just cut down that little bit of friction, right? Like go to the gym for a minute or two. As ridiculous as it sounds, like establish the habit and just make it happen. Like, maybe you're somebody who's sat on the couch for 10 hours a day for the last decade. Well, you can sit there and wallow and beat yourself up about it. Or just like everything we do here at Choose Survive, you can get up and take action and make your life better, one tiny little percent at a time. And that might mean your first walk. You might just take a walk every day. Walking is fantastic. It's one of the best things you can do for your health. Walk 100 steps the first day, walk 110 steps the next day. I mean, we're talking 1 minute. And then you get up to 2, 5, 10. All of a sudden, your life looks dramatically different.
It's funny you bring up James Clear because I was thinking about that book as you were talking. Because another thing that I've noticed about you is the way that you talk about physical fitness is tied to your identity. And he talks about that being the most powerful motivator, that when we say, okay, not I'm going for a run or I'm going to a gym, but I'm a runner. And I hear you using that kind of language where it's like, I'm a person who does this every day. This is important to me. So there's a way in which you've integrated into your life so that it's not about tracking how many runs you've done or how much you've been in this particular zone. It's about this is how I live my life. And that's really different and makes it really a lot easier.
Yeah, that identity it really is important. This is in every aspect of life, right? I'm the type of person that dot dot dot. And yeah, in this case, it's not something that's short termism. It's yeah, like you're saying, I'm a healthy, fit person, and I think that then transfers into a ton of different areas of life. I mean, if you think even for somebody who goes to the gym a bunch, right, 1 hour a day for 5 days a week, but then the other 163 hours that week are just sitting around doing nothing, you're not a healthy, fit person. You wouldn't fit that identity statement. So, I mean, I'm constantly looking for just little ways to I guess increase my overall health. And it's not something I'm fanatical about, but it's just again, it's that same mindset of It's all right, I'm just looking for tiny little 1% things and they start to add up over years into decades into something truly extraordinary.
It is the same thing because you're saying when you talk about what are those different things that I do besides my workout, it's about being a congruent person. So, how do I live up to that identity? How do I live a life that's in alignment with my values? And that's the same if it's money. It's the same if it's, health.
Agree. Totally agree. So, Ginger, we got another email, this one from Joe. And Joe was asking about a retirement calculator that allows for his pension. He said he also has a 457 to accompany his pension, but he doesn't believe that the numbers are really working out right, or as he said, real in the calculator he's using. And he was curious if we had any suggestions. So, I think the best way to do this, and this is just one of those almost like annual reminders that I like to give out, because I do get this question a lot, is okay, I have a pension. I understand that my FI number is, in very broad general terms, it's take my annual expenses and multiply by 25, right? And that gets me to a net worth where I've reached financial independence. But it seems to be confusing for many, many people that, oh, I have a pension also, or I have this other supplementary income or some such that is like essentially guaranteed. So we'll just for the sake of this example, we'll say some guaranteed number, but I don't know how to figure that out because it's not a lump sum. And we've spoken with, so we've had Grumpus Maximus on the show a bunch of times, episode 57, episode 227, and I think 316 also, actually. And he had the book, The Golden Albatross. And it talks about basically, is your pension worth it, more or less? And what came out of that, and I think I tried to distill this really quickly, was okay, the easiest way, this is actually way easier than it seems on the face of it. And really, this could work with, like I said, something that's guaranteed, like a Social Security or something that you know that's coming in every month that you want to factor in, but you don't have that lump sum to figure it out. Well, again, it's way easier than you'd expect. You just take your annual expenses. So let's just say that Joe has a pension that's maybe bringing in $40,000 a year, just hypothetically. Okay. And his life expenses are $60,000 a year. Okay. So 60,000 under a normal circumstance, you would say, okay, I just take my $60,000 per year expenses, multiply by 25. That gets me to $1.5 million. And that's my FI number. All right. So that's the standard FI calculation. But in this case, Joe, again, hypothetically, has a $40,000 pension. So you just very simply say, well, my expenses aren't 60,000. Sure, my gross expenses are $60,000, but really net after that pension, I just subtract that pension out. And then what's left is, what do I have to make up for that's not guaranteed coming in? It's $20,000, right? So because the 40,000 of the 60 expenses are covered. They're coming in every year with this pension. So you don't need to calculate based on 60,000. You need to calculate based on what's left, which is the 20,000. And then you multiply that by 25 and you get a FI number that's really quite different. It's $500,000 in that case. So Joe would have to reorient that to, okay, when my 457 and my other accounts, et cetera, reach $500,000 in this case, then I've reached FI because of this pension that I have that is guaranteed and is coming in every month and every year, basically.
What if it gets a little bit complicated because Joe wants to retire before his pension will kick in?
Yeah, that is a great question. So you certainly would need more like advanced modeling than you and I can do in our heads here, unfortunately. But you would have to create just essentially a bridge. And yeah, I could flail trying to figure out how to talk about this from the spreadsheet that I'm seeing in my head. But in essence, you would have to say, how many years is this extra? And you have to find a way to cover that. And it might just mean, it could be something actually as simple as, okay, what if the shortfall, so it's $40,000, right, per year, because we're saying that's what his pension is. You could actually potentially exhaust the money. So let's say I'm doing this off the top of my head, so bear with me. I might have a better answer after the fact, in which case we'll follow up the next time we do a roundup. But I'm just thinking, okay, he doesn't need 40,000 times 25, which would be the FI number, because there's an end date to this. So he actually needs, as we're saying, maybe he's retiring 10 years early before he could get his pension. He needs to make up for that $40,000 for 10 years. That could be a scenario where, all right, again, to cover his FI number for the other $20,000, he needs a $500,000 net worth. And that is like sacrosanct. We're not playing with that. That's just there. But maybe he just needs an extra $400,000 because he could just literally take out $40,000 a year for the next 10 years, exhaust that extra money. And then at the end of that 10-year period, he again has his net worth of 500,000, which covers the $20,000. And he has his pension then coming in for 40,000. And voila, that covers his $60,000. So that's an off the top of my head. And I think that would work. You'd have to index it ever so slightly for inflation. So I wouldn't say have exactly $400,000 to the penny. But I think, Ginger, directionally, that would be a pretty nice, simple way. And in that case, he would need basically $900,000 instead of 1.5 million, which is what he would need if he just did the simple calculation of, hey, my expenses are $60,000 times 25 gets you to that 1.5.
Mm-hmm. And I loved what you said about how this works for Social Security too. So if you're planning on retiring closer to a traditional retirement age, if you're planning on your Social Security being a fair chunk of your retirement, then you just do the same thing, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think a lot of us in the FI community don't factor in Social Security. It's like, I think so many of us are layer levels of conservatism with our money on top of each other. It's like, oh, the 4% rule, that's way too aggressive for me. So I'm going to use the 3% rule and I'm going to count Social Security as zero and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to work for 3 extra years. Like, right? Like we get caught up in that. And I think a lot of people, when they look at the numbers, say, man, we're just not being even close to aggressive enough. And really, that's costing us potentially years of our lives. But I think a lot of us just have that ingrained need for safety. And I mean, obviously, nobody can know where the future of politics and the winds go. But I am factoring in my own calculation, the worst case scenario is Social Security takes about a 25% haircut, and I get about 75% of what my anticipated benefits are as of today. I think that realistically, if anybody, just from a strategic standpoint, like I look at politics and things like that from like a strategic standpoint, is nobody in their right mind, no politician in their right mind, and certainly not enough to pass the end of Social Security is going to completely cut Social Security. The likelihood of that is essentially zero. So
Yeah.
if you're factoring that Social Security is going to be zero for you, I think you need to reassess risk because it's just not practical.
Yeah, I was laughing earlier because that's me. And it's not because I think Social Security won't be there. I think from what I've read too, I think 75% you can probably count on. But there's something about the mindset of like, well, what can I control? And that's so far away, but I'm laughing because that's dumb. That's, that's so dumb. I should be factoring it in for sure.
Yeah, but I get it. And especially the control what you can control, that appeals to me, and I understand that. And yeah, this is obviously something outside of your control. But again, I think if we're being intellectually honest and reasonable with ourselves,
Let's be
there's a high
reasonable.
likelihood. Yeah, high likelihood. At least 70% of the benefits will be there. So we'll see. But yeah, I think that was a good question, certainly, and hopefully we helped Joe and helped other people really think about this because there are lots of different aspects. I mean, we talked about the most obvious one, which is Social Security, but who knows? Maybe you have some rental income that's coming in, and you didn't know how to mentally account for it. And I think it's way simpler. It's just you just net your expenses with that essentially guaranteed income that's coming in, and then you factor into, okay, now I can apply the 4% rule or whatever rule you decide to use.
I loved how last time we ended on a win from the community. So let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We have a bunch. So let's go for it.
Okay, so this one is from Sarah. She wrote in and said, I just found your podcast a few weeks ago, and already it has helped me in so many ways. I feel as though all I've done is make mistakes trying to do what I'm supposed to do. Listening to the podcast, especially addressing the psychology of decisions and money, has really made me feel like I can turn things around. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a little better than the day before. My 1% better is I reduced my cell phone bill from $80 per month to $25 by switching from Verizon to Visible.
That is cool.
I love that. Especially this part about it made me feel like I can turn things around because that's true for all of us at any stage of our growth.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The mindset here that Sarah is showing is just incredible. And it's never too late. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about FI. Like, as I conceptualize FI, is your path to FI can start at any age. It doesn't matter if you're 19 or you're 52
Mm-hmm.
and you're just getting started because you're taking little actions to make your life better. And plain and simple, it winds its way into its little tendrils in the best possible way into every aspect of your life. And you just are looking to live a better life. And a lot of times that's for, okay, who am I going to spend my time with? How am I going to be healthier and live longer and be able to move better, like we talked about? And how am I going to add value to the world? Right? Like it's all of these things. It's not just the nuts and bolts of the money, but as Sarah's learning, it starts with the nuts and bolts of the money. And man, every single one of those wins just feels so good at the beginning. All right, we got an email from Joel who said, I just wanted to drop in and share my 1% better this week. Just paid off our second car. No more car payments, hopefully forever. Now I can take that extra money and start chipping away at the house principal. And we're already maxing out our savings and tax advantage accounts and putting more into the brokerage account. This loan was the last remaining relic of the time before I discovered Fi and your podcast about 2 years ago. Very grateful for all the guidance and encouragement from the podcast and the community, and excited for what the next few years hold for us.
He's killing it.
That's amazing. And that really typifies our community, right? It's these people who, again, they're coming in and they're taking action. And there's just something about this community of people that's just extraordinary. They're not just sitting and listening, taking this stuff in passively, right? They're actually making their lives better.
It's one thing I really like about your newsletter, about how you always include the wins from the community. And there's something so positive about this community, about it's not a zero-sum game and we can all be so happy for each other, figuring it out.
Yeah. And that is just the most fun part I have of writing that newsletter every single week is just seeing these amazing 1% wins. And we do have one more win to read, but since you mentioned the newsletter, I want to mention, so chooseavi.com/subscribe, or if you just go to our homepage and there's a button in the upper right, I think it says something like Brad's Fi Weekly, that gets you on the newsletter. And actually, Ginger, I'm gonna tease something here, which Jonathan and we're spending more time together now than we ever have, probably 8 to 10 hours a week at the gym. And we were just talking in the last day or so about, what would it look like to have maybe Jonathan come back on the podcast a little bit?
Woohoo!
Which, it's super cool. And I think we're both trying to really completely revitalize and overhaul our website and just make it the single best personal finance resource on the internet. I think, frankly, and I can say this humbly, I believe this podcast is the best personal finance podcast in the world. And I think it has radically helped people's lives. And I think, honestly, I've always been a little disappointed with our website because I haven't had the time and energy to devote to the website like I have, and certainly Jonathan has, to the podcast. And I think both of us are trying to really make a push to make something longer lasting. I think the podcast, 600 episodes, they get lost in the ether. There's no way to search them, there's no way to curate them. And we're really making a push to create a lot of new content and put it actually on the website. We're still in the planning stages. So I think there might be this extra little podcast that we do that shows up on our website in some way, or certainly to people who are subscribed to the newsletter. So that is it's a little tease. It's still in process. We're trying to figure out what this is going to look like, but chooseavi.com/subscribe, I think, will definitely be worth your while for the nice free subscription. So we'll see, but I'm excited. Jonathan is emboldened and super excited to come back in some way. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, what's this final win you got?
Okay, so Jason and Alexandra wrote in, all those small 1% wins have added up to us reaching Coast Fi this week, and we couldn't be more excited. We found the Fi community back in 2020, and it opened our eyes to all of life's possibilities when you live intentionally. We were lucky to have been naturally frugal into our early 40s, along with solid incomes in a low cost of living area. With some help from sources throughout the Fi community, like Choose a Fi, we were able to put it all together. We have won our lives back. The Fi community is obviously so much more than finances. It opens a window on how to live a better life. Yeah, that's amazing. Huge congrats. They've reached Coast Fi, and the world is their oyster at this point. Obviously, Coast Fi means you've reached a point where your investments are working in the background and compounding, and you don't have to save another dollar, but you have to earn enough income to cover your expenses until you get to traditional Fi. But man, you only need a fraction of the income, and it just gives you more options and flexibility. So big congrats.
What a win.
What a win indeed. All right, Ginger. Well, we got to about half of the list that we have. So another roundup we will have very, very soon.
I'll be
People can
back.
look forward to that.
Yeah.
And people can always find you at fiisfun.com.
Yes. Head on over.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend, for being here. This is fun.